So thank you for taking the challenge. We have some new people on the panel that we presented before, so maybe we start with a quick round of introduction.
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Bhavna Role. I'm from Accenture, part of the data and AI team, and I've been very closely involved in leading the work with 1K30 Singapore, which is on DataXperts, which is application of responsible AI in the FS industry. And glad to bring some of my past learnings in the past 2 years and still continuing to this and learn a lot from my panelists here. Thank you.
And a quick introduction, my name is Jerry Chen. I'm a partner from Risk Advisory in Deloitte, Singapore. Outside of Deloitte, I also take part in this AI ethics quite a fair bit. So Singapore has this AI technical committee, which is an interface into the ISO for a lot of the standards development around AI, as well as in the Singapore Computer Society. There's a special interest group on AI ethics and governance, which I currently chair as well. So those are some of the things that I do in this space.
Hi, I'm Sarat. I'm the Dean of Computer Science School at fintech. I'm also running an NLP research group at the school, and we basically write research papers, trying to bring in new NLP advancements into the Thai language, and we also conduct an open source project. One candidates where we will build foundation models for Thai language, and at the same time we're building a bunch of benchmarks for assessing language models as well.
Yeah, so Anthony is Managing Director of SCBX Southeast Asia. I introduced myself earlier. I think you were all here. Hopefully you can remember my background.
Thank you all. And again, thank you for joining us. So we've seen quite a lot of things about what AI can do. We can also understood that it's not just a single line interface that we see with ChatGPT, but that behind the scenes there is a lot of complexity. And my first question will be about what kind of principle and consideration should guide us when we go and develop AI and of course deploy it in real-time scenarios. So maybe Bhavna, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Dr. Shruti. So that's actually one of the key things, when you start thinking about how you design your different systems and things like that. And we heard a lot about the various risks that people are talking about in the earlier presentations and so on. So I think the key thing to start is get back to what are the ethical considerations when you're trying to deploy data and AI for any of your business problems or challenges and so on. And when you're looking at the ethics, it goes back to things like not just transparency and fairness, that is essential, but also things like robustness and soundness, security, privacy, sustainability, which you spoke about earlier. So all these you have to sort of map to what is important for the organization, not just for regulatory purposes, but for the core ethics and values of the organization and the society sort of presents. Once you do that, you actually design your principles on the basis of that, which guide how you operationalize this, and the operationalization of these ethics is nothing but responsible AI. And that's where you start looking into the various design. You basically need to be responsible by design, and that's where you need to think about governance as the starting point. And if you set up the right accountability framework, who is responsible for what? It has to come from top, but then there is a certain level of cross-functional responsibility across the organization, and not just the organization, even your third-party vendors. And given we're talking about generative AI, foundational models, data coming from everywhere. So how do you extend that governance beyond your organization across your ecosystem? How do you have the right controls in place? How do you have the right mitigation in place? When do you need human in the loop versus on the loop? And these kind of things. How do you bring in technology? Technology is not the while it enables your controls in place, you need to have the right technology for the right kind of purpose that you're using. And then finally, definitely about the culture and training, which again has been spoken about. And also getting down into, it's not just one size fits all, right? Leadership needs a different kind of training versus my front-end customer service people need to understand why are they using it as a different kind of training versus the practitioners. So I think all these different considerations is what you need to think about when you're designing systems. Sorry, a little long answer, but
No. Anyone else?
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing that we need to consider right now, right, and it's been something that we've been advocating for the past 6 months, is alignment of expectations. At this point, we are having pretty unrealistic expectations about AI, and actually that actually hurts the industry in the sense that when you go and talk to executives, they sometimes they have the expectation that AI is like it's like a general software tool that can solve everything. Where like the talk I'm giving you guys today is part of expectation alignments where I really want to show that it's about pattern recognition, right? So when you look at AI as a pattern recognition, it kind of lowers your expectation a little bit. In the sense that we are the ones providing patterns for machines to learn, right? Now, right? We are responsible for producing data sets that can that allows the machine to learn the pattern so that they can use it later on. That's the data part, all right? And on a high level, I today also talked about benchmarks. This is something that we don't really pay enough attention. Okay, a lot of benchmarks that we use today are very academic. A lot of algorithms perform extremely well on the benchmarks, but perform poorly when they're deployed. So there is this gap between what AI can do on paper and what AI can do after deployments. So this kind of like expectation gaps is something that we need to close very quickly in order for this industry to move forward.
If I may jump in a bit on the few points, the how I think is going to be very important, and while the principles are broadly agreed globally, the challenge is really how do you do it, and it all differs from one application to another. So when we talk about its fairness, robustness, it's very important to then take into context of what you're actually using it for, so that you are able to then develop the appropriate controls around it. And I think transparency is increasingly going to be one of the things which is very important. If you notice that the two hackathon presentations, they all closed with the system architecture. And I think there's a reason behind that it's not just showing what is in the front, but also hoping to convey how does it work. What are the data that comes in, what are the components that goes in. So I think there are quite a lot of ways to go in the transparency front that helps to build the trust of what is actually being done in the background.
Yeah, maybe agree with the kind of previous points. Maybe to build on that, we think about what are we generally trying to protect against, right? So we want to not do anything that's unethical. We don't want to be cheating our customers, right? So what might be an example of cheating our customers? So if we we were to put out an algorithm that generated marketing material, and that algorithm started to optimize towards what worked most effectively and didn't have controls around it, it could be the case that it actually starts mis-selling or overselling your products because that's working super effectively. And that's all the algorithm cares about. Okay, what's working most? Okay, I tell bigger and bigger claims all the time. So that's one example of kind of things that we need to protect against, making false statements in order to optimize to sell more. This is actually not something that's inherently new, right? Any incentivized salesperson could run the same risk, but an algorithm can take it to the extreme and run without observability, right? So this is where we come into some of these kind of observability questions. Second thing that we might try to protect against is accuracy. We don't want to put out incorrect data, particularly some of the points that you were mentioning earlier. This could happen in the sales front, but it could also happen in a customer service context or any scenario where we fully automated the explanation of the delivery of the services or contracts or things that will be provided could be without malintent, could just be interpreted incorrectly by the algorithm, described inaccurately, leading to financial loss by the user or the customer. And then, in addition to this, we could see. I lost my third point. All right, I'll come back to the third point when I remember it later. I've got three. I'll keep it in the bank, and I'm sure it'll be relevant for one of the other questions.
Thank you. In the army in Israel, we used to say that everything we need to split into three parts.
Yeah, exactly.
So the gun you can divide into three main parts. Anything in the army you can split into three parts.
My colleague told me, Andy, said never say that there's going to be three parts in case you forget the third one. Just go 1, 2, and forget. So I forgot that one. Anyway.
Thank you very much for those insights. Now there are many parties involved in putting AI into action. It starts with the guy that deals with the data, the developers, the data scientists, the deployers. All around that, there are all kinds of people that look into security, governance, you name it. And maybe from your experience, if I want to do it, what kind of tools, frameworks should I put into this process in order to be on top of it? I don't know what every developer is doing on his laptop. I don't want to know it also, but any insights or tips, how to deal with this quite complex life cycle, because it's not that it's a loop at the end. You do something, you find out that it works, doesn't work, and it goes back into a cycle of finding more data, building more models, adapting models. So any practical ideas about how to put it into action, or where to focus and how to focus?
Let me jump in as I remember my third point.
You get priority for the next question.
So the third thing that we need to protect against is data privacy, right? User data. So I think that we have already many mechanisms and legislations in place to protect that. The thing that we can easily forget is when we're using a chat interface like ChatGPT or something similar, we can dump some data in there, and that can contain customer private individuals, so much as it to become ineffective, and still there would be loopholes around the site. So the best thing to do is to think about how you can systematically communicate the risks and the best practices across the organisation to everybody who has access to that type of data, which is probably everybody, which is probably every single employee who has access to a computer system.
If I jump in a little bit on where do you start in trying to manage that risk? I would say that in a lot of organizations, the practice has been there for a while. But if we generalize this to technology risk management, very much I think you should be using that as your starting point. The domains and concerns will obviously be different because we are now looking at things like scalability, robustness, privacy on top of what you would normally look at in technology. But I think there are some, if we look at cybersecurity as an example, a lot of companies struggled initially about 10 years ago. But if we ask a lot of companies today, they have a better feel about it. And I think the answer is yes, the industry has improved a lot because over the years, a lot of things has changed and tried to narrow this gap between what management understands and what the technology people are trying to say. AI right now, generally, I think it's at the stage where the management and a lot of stakeholders do not necessarily understand what is being conveyed to them. So there's this whole disconnect between, we're presenting metrics and stats, this is what we are doing, but management has a responsibility to sign off on some of the risks that are being done, but do they really understand what is being presented to them? I'll just take one example that popped up in one of the slides earlier, right? Fraud detection, 97-98% accuracy. I sometimes argue that if I had a fraud algorithm and the output of the algorithm is a single line that says no fraud, I'm probably going to be right 95% of the time. So what does 97 and 98% mean? So when we present metrics like this, do we really understand what goes on behind to know whether it's 97 good? Because if I just always say no fraud, I'm probably 95. So I think there is this gap that needs to be closed between what technologies are saying and what management is understanding.
Add to that, I think the point that you touched upon, the whole communication strategy, I think that is really key. Because we talk about transparency, we talk about fairness and bias, but how do you communicate that? At the end of the day, it's not a data scientist problem only. I mean, we build the right tools to calculate it, but you need to communicate it to the right stakeholders. You need to communicate to a customer why your loan has been denied, or your credit limit has been increased or not increased. And what is the right way to do that? Do you want to communicate some certain things in case of fraud or financial crime? Maybe you don't want to. And similarly with the internal stakeholders, right? Can I explain to my marketing personnel or the customer service personnel who has to explain that to the final customer? Do I have that right communication strategy in place? So I think all these kind of things really enable transparency and bring in more accountability within the organization. And the other thing is that this is where we need to include people from across the organization, not just like I said, data scientists. You need to bring in different views to sort of when you're designing your whole thing, so that there is no unconscious bias by just one group of people. So you need to bring in people from legal, from behavioral scientist background, from various backgrounds to build the right controls and things like that in place.
Okay. So basically, coming back to the pattern recognition problem, right? One thing that you have to keep in mind when you use deep learning is that if there is a shortcut in the data for the model to learn, it's going to learn it. Okay, so basically one way to mitigate this is to make sure that your algorithm doesn't learn from the bias, doesn't learn from the artifact in the data. Okay? Another way to do this is the data-centric way, is to make sure that you're not using your model in an out of distribution fashion, right? Make sure that you continuously monitor the input and evaluate whether the input coming into the system is out of the distribution of the training data or not. One thing that I would like to see more discussion, especially in Thailand, is machine learning operations. I think it's a very good framework for us to adopt, because it treats an ML system as a software system, right? If you want to update the data without updating the model code, how do you do it? You want to keep the model as updating the data, how do you do it efficiently? These sort of things, okay, if you apply the best practice, it can help us mitigate the out of distribution risks.
I agree with you. Where I see, I think that there is a maturity that's happening, I think, with the MLOps, that starting to see all this data science as an engineering practice and not as a magic or something that kids understand and do by themselves. So having a really control on the engineering side which includes the transparency, version management, version control, all those things, if you want to scale, I think it's a must. And luckily there is a lot of products coming out in this community currently. Any other comment?
Yeah, I think actually transparency is an interesting one, right? We've all mentioned it a few times. But it's also a difficult one because what's happening in the background is complicated. So, how do we really make it transparent? I'm reminded a little bit of the time 10 years ago. I developed this startup and an AI backend, and I was trying to raise money on it. And I would say, the AI figures this out, and that's something that we've never been able to do before. And the VCs would say, well, how does it work? How does it know? Saying, well, there's this decision tree, and then multiple decision trees, and a thing called random forest, and they would say, wait, I don't understand what you're talking about. I don't understand it. I say, well, I know you don't understand it. It's quite complicated, so you have to trust me that I've tested that it works. Well, I don't know about this. I think if we move forward, people are more willing to trust the black box of AI than they were 10 years ago. Maybe for good and for bad. But we still have this same problem. So we're going to put something potentially in front of the customer. We're keen to be transparent about what we've done, but there's no way that we can put on the website, hey, we're just giving you this response, and let me show you the algorithm behind it that's created it. So the customer has to have some trust that us as an organization have done it properly and appropriately. And even within the organization, the leadership team that probably don't understand the technical details of the model need to have trust that that's been developed in the appropriate way or checked in the appropriate way by the appropriate bodies. Which is on the one hand new, but also the same thing that needs to happen even before AI, right? So I go to a bank, I give you my money, I need to trust that you have the appropriate security, digitally and physically, in place to protect my money, and that if you don't, you're going to give me your money back. So it's not a new concept, but it's not one that can be fully solved by transparency. There has to be actually multiple levels of trust in place in the organization, and as there is today.
If I may jump in on the point, I think that's a great point about challenges in the transparency as well as explainability. But I think one of the things is that transparency need not be a binary, I can be fully transparent or just trust me. And I think there's some gradient in between that can be done. If we look at the transparency, the way that we have always been viewing it is that it can be very technical at the deepest level to talk about things like even your data provenance, right? Where does the data come from that is used for the training? And there were some comments came up quite a few times about out of distribution representation. So how do you know that this data that you are training on is representative of what you are going to be deploying it? There must be an answer to this question. At the deepest, at the most technical level of transparency, it's all these questions, the right questions around why is this process, why do you think this process is correct? You chose a random forest, why was this the best algorithm that was there? What metrics did you use? Did you use accuracy? Why was accuracy the best metric? So I think there's a degree of technical questions that need to be asked. When it comes to the consumer, of course, I don't think it's expected that you explain it to them in that language, but you need to be able to at least convey to them there is an algorithm. This algorithm is making use of whichever data, it's all the questions you've asked already, it's making use of this data, and we have measured based on whichever metrics, and this is quite representative of what the prediction is meant to be. And then I think that gives a little bit more comfort that some governance and some work has been done at the back end. So I think it always starts off with something very detailed, but for the different stakeholders, you have to summarize it in a way that's meaningful for them. So that's I think some of the views that I have around transparency as well.
So going back to what Dr. Shri was talking about ML ops, right, and how do you design that ML ops to be scalable and things like that. I think that's really key because now we're seeing AI pretty much everywhere across the organization, right? So you definitely can't have like all models go through this process or things like that. So the degree of transparency you need to have, the degree of how you need to govern or things like that. So I think that's where you need to start thinking about the risk of the underlying AI systems, the models and things like that, and have some differentiated thing for very high risk versus medium versus low. I mean, EU is AI Act is already talking about it. Might be a bit rigid there right now, but so sort of do that, and that's how you can and have the right controls in place when you're talking about ML ops, right? So to what extent documentation is needed for high-risk systems versus a system which just tells me whether sentiment in my news page is good or not, or something like that. So so you need to think about that, consider that, and that's how you can actually scale it when you're talking about an organization, I think.
Just to comment about this explainability thing, in my past I worked on networks that were, black box that spit a number and you cannot understand. But in scenarios where you have a human involved, so let's say it's a call center agent that needs to explain to the customer why he didn't get a loan. There are some techniques that try to look at profiles of bad customers, those that got a loan and never paid back, and customers that were good. And look at the profile of the customer and look for similarities or deviation, and then in many cases you can justify, I see that in order to be a good customer you have to have this, and you don't have it, or you have that. So there's such technique, not perfect, I must admit, but my thinking is now maybe ChatGPT or those kind of LLMs can also reason about it. Does this customer, how can I explain to this customer that you cannot get the loan? I think we can also deploy AI to do this reasoning. Just came to me now, I didn't register anything.
Yeah, no, actually that's a very interesting point, and that's where you can give the customer a chance to remediate. That I know that if I change my a certain parameter by certain, I can show that I have alternative ways of income and show my better credit worthiness. So it's not just okay, loan is denied, this is the reason.
Yeah,
But
what,
how
what
can
kind
I
of
actually-
what kind of debt you need to close?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Shall we move to the next?
Yeah.
So, looking again at the risk regulation, what kind of roles, again, we have people here from Thailand, from Singapore, probably that know other countries. So, what is your take on the role that the regulatory and government bodies should play in overseeing the development and deployment of AI technologies?
Okay, I think first, thank you. So definitely, regulatory bodies do have a role, a very important role in this whole thing for oversight and so on. It's just that has to be a balance between innovation and regulation. So it's a hard line to sort of draw. Again, taking examples, right? The way EU has gone, it's very definitive. This is how it is. If you don't do this, there will be fines. Versus there are other regulators which have gone like a soft approach, saying here are the guidelines and principles. Let's follow that. So there's no right or wrong. It's basically how the norms of that those different communities are. EU is very much on human rights, and that comes first. Versus another country will be more on corporate rights are probably more important and so on. So I think it depends on that. Regulation, because you're right, regulators do need to have some oversight, and they need to probably define at least at a framework level, what how the different organizations should at least follow a certain level of principles or things like that. If they can go down to further granularity, great, but again depends on how the norms of that culture norms of the society are.
Jump in with respect to this. I like the way that Jeff Bezos thinks about things. We try to think about the future, right? So one of the things that he does is it's really difficult to identify what will change. It's easier to think about what will not change. Right? So if we kind of paraphrase that a little bit and apply it to this, and a bit to the previous point, I think some of the things that we're trying to do should fall within the spirit, at least, of the existing regulation, right? I should, whether I have generative AI or not generative AI, I should not be pretending to be somebody else, right? Whether an organization is using generative AI or not using generative AI, it should not be overstating the claims of its products, etc., etc. So I think in most cases, the principles that we're trying to adhere to should not change based on generative AI, but there might be something around the rules, the edge cases, the implementation that the regulators need to think about, and they need to double check everything that they're already trying to protect for today, and say, does what I have today actually cover the generative AI scenario? Maybe it does. Maybe that's fine. I can leave that one alone. Actually, have we identified a new loophole through generative AI that we need to just amend the legislation for? So I am aware through painful experience that many of the ways that these rules are written actually are in such a structured way that probably need to be rewritten quite a lot. But the spirit of what they're trying to protect, should not change. And maybe if they learn something from past mistakes, it would be to write what they're trying to protect in a way that is a little bit more flexible and doesn't get easily broken by new technological innovation that will inevitably come.
So this is actually quite a complex question to really look at. And if we look at regulations at the federal or national level, that is always going to be one challenge, right? And if we look at a lot of things coming up now, there is a lot of political flavor behind it. So if you look at EU AI Act, it's human rights. You look at China, it is very much about protecting sovereignty. You look at UK, they're trying to essentially demonstrate the benefits of Brexit, its pro-innovation, US, so on and so forth. You keep going into it, there's a lot of political flavor behind the regulations that's coming up. But it's very clear that every government needs to, and they want to balance that innovation versus regulation. Because there's always this question of, is it too early and nobody else has done it other than EU? Nobody else has done it. Do I want to be the first one to put the brakes on something that can change our economy? So this is always on the top of mind, which is where a broad regulation like the EU, like China, is going to be harder to come by. That's my personal view. And instead, I think I agree with Andy, there's going to be a lot of leveraging back onto what are some of the laws that are there that seems to cover the adoption of AI. So that's going to be one thing. The second thing is there's likely going to be sectorial regulations rather than a broad national regulation. So in Singapore, for example, the MAS has the FEED principles, fairness, ethics, accountability, transparency. Very narrow, but very specific to the use cases the banks will see. New York, I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, they also finally enforced the law, they call it the Local Law 144, which is essentially if you're using any AI models in the shortlisting of candidates and the promotion of your employees, it has to go through bias audits. So it's very specific bias audits, and they define the few metrics that the auditor must check and report. So it's very narrow, it doesn't cover robustness, it doesn't cover privacy, but it becomes very narrow for a particular purpose in a sector. So I think I will start, my belief is that there will be a lot more sectorial focus while trying to leverage across what will be the other digital acts or digital laws which are in place over the last few years already.
Just one more thing to add on that is that I think one of the things that regulators are sort of thinking about is, just like Andy said, at a principle level, they all sort of agree that these are the right principles to have. But I think the question is now use regulation to stop bad actors. I think that is right now a bigger question for them. That, I mean, this, yes, but I think that is something that they're grappling with. How do you deal with, deal with deepfakes or cybersecurity? What kind of regulations that you can have for watermarks against them? Making sure that they always reveal when it's AI versus human. I think those regulations probably are something that need to come up faster than the other one, which I think we should be okay at a principle level.
I think AI should be somewhat regulated, but again, right, as the question suggests, we got a balance between control and innovation. So I'm more on the guideline side of things, where the government steps in and try to make sure that the expectations of AI developers and the users align with each other. I think what the government can really do, and I would love to see more effort put into this, is the benchmarks, right? This is something that we use to communicate, we use to set expectations, but I only see government talk about public policies and all these things, where there are perfect tools, there are best practices for aligning expectations between public and developers, and we don't really see efforts or attention paid into that part. So I think guideline, benchmarks, and light regulations is probably the way to go for this.
If I may add one point, I agree with that point on toolkits and benchmarks. And in fact, in Singapore, if you don't mind me sharing that, a few years ago they came up with this initiative called AI Verify. It was, if you look at it in a nutshell, it's really making use of open source toolkits. they put it into technology where essentially if you go to a company loads in the model and is able to generate some reports on robustness metrics, fairness metrics, etc. And the whole idea was really, when you go to enough companies, do you have a baseline of what is so-called practice and what is good across? They realized that it was hard to maintain it within, it was done by the BBC in Singapore. They realized it was hard to do it internally, and they just actually opened it up as a AI verified foundation. They open sourced the whole project so that now anybody around the world can contribute to the project and use the code openly as well. So I think I do agree that's one of the key things that allows people to do the how and then compare the results as well.
Just to add, regarding what you mentioned about the friction between innovation and regulation, I mean, my view is also that we need to find ways that the organizations themselves, the enterprises, will know how to deal with it. We have in the financial industry processes that says whenever you put a model, you have to go to a committee to check the risk management of the model. And in this world, model change on the fly. We cannot spend, and really it's a painful process that can take you 8 weeks sometimes, to find the people to show the simulations. And here it's, you cannot live with that. So there is a lot of place also to think how the organization can innovate and still stay on top of risk, but probably move to more experimental methods and less on paper exercises and things like that. Okay, so let's try to be a bit more optimistic. It's our last subject is how can AI help the world be AI for good? Ideas about how to address the climate challenges that we have, that all those big computers contribute gracefully to the CO emission. Someone mentioned about the use for healthcare, which probably collaboration can help from the poverty, inclusion, ethical. So what you see as the bright future. We have a black screen behind, but let's talk about the good things.
Yeah, I think that's the obvious one. I mentioned it very briefly earlier. A couple of big companies, including Google's DeepMind, doing a lot of research in this area. They've been doing, I know for a number of years now, actually, not specifically generative AI, but traditional AI as well. And the first drug candidates are beginning to come through the trial process that's come out of that now, and I think that's really the tip of the iceberg in terms of that. I know they really needed to kind of prove this process through, but that being successful and having cracked it, actually like most of the AI stuff, what sits behind it is an incredible opportunity for doing something at scale, right? And these, the specific problem that DeepMind has been working on is like protein folding. These protein folding problems are problems that are best cracked by scale, right? And I'm sure, I'm not an expert in the medical field. I'm sure there are many other similar use cases in the medical space where just pure brute force and scale of being able to try infinite number of combinations to solve the problem rapidly, and then take that through a stage gated process to release it to market. I'm sure we'll see phenomenal breakthroughs over the next few years.
Coming to sustainability, so obviously there's so many applications there, right? So one of the things that we're doing with maybe as Montreal or Singapore is looking at applying AI for sustainability. So one of the problems of sustainability is collecting data from small and medium enterprises. I mean, you can still get data from larger institutes and so on, but small and medium, one, they don't know what to collect. Second is everything is unstructured, they will have electricity bills, they might have some vendor bills and other kind of things. So that's why your AI comes in, actually collecting all that information, making sense of it, and actually saying, this is your footprint. Because at the end of the day, 60% of emissions of the country are actually due to SMEs. So those kind of things. Plus, obviously, if you think about the whole climate scenario, the catastrophic event detection, we're talking about in 2040 what is going to be if my temperature increases by 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, and things like that. So all those simulations and everything is what AI would run that. But here is where the conundrum lies. While we use AI to do these wonderful things, we use very big and powerful AI, which themselves have an impact on sustainability because they are big machines sort of using this. So I think that's where we need to think about how much of that big data and everything do we really need. Is it the right solution to solve that problem, or to your problem can we use some smaller LLMs? So I think there needs to be that balance when you're talking about these big questions that you're trying to solve, and not just go for the biggest is the best.
I think there are a lot of applications of AI for good, and one of the things in which I see that it has a potential of changing is really the way we as a society learn and create. I started my career close to 20 over years ago, and I've seen really this is a kind of my third evolution of the way we learn and create things. When we first started, some of us may remember, we have to read books because the information is not at your fingertips or the phone. You just Google, you get it, right? We have to read books, we have to highlight, take notes, because you don't carry your books everywhere with you. So if you don't remember what you have read, you are not able to answer somebody on the spot. What do we comment about some of our employees today? They don't bother to remember everything. And to them, it's very basic. Why do I have to remember everything if I just search for it? It's there. And I think with GPTs coming out, we're seeing that third wave of evolution where sometimes, even if I don't know some of the things, I have somebody to spar with, and it is that knowledge. Just now there was a presentation of the teacher, the education 4.0. I think we are reaching that point as well. And I think it has that, if done well, it has the ability to really uplift the society as a whole. But I still want to remain a practical optimist, so I will still add in a little bit of the dark side here. Sometimes we focus too much on the shiny things in AI, but we forget about the facts of, if there's a job displacement, who gets displaced and who gets a new job. It may not be the same person. If we don't deal with it carefully, it can actually widen the digital divide that we have. If we handle it well, I was quite impressed with a lot of other scholarships that was being discussed earlier, trying to uplift the education of the society as a whole. I think those are important things to do. If done well, I believe there is that potential of how we learn and create in the future.
Okay, let's just pause a bit, right? Maybe let's just think carefully what we are using AI to do. Okay. Back in the old days, right? Human have been very successful in outsourcing muscle tasks. Okay, AI is about outsourcing brain tasks. If you think about it carefully, right? Now with the pattern recognition technologies, any pattern that human can recognize within 5 seconds, AI can probably do better right now. Okay, but if you look around you, okay, all the tasks that you're doing nowadays, there are still a lot of 5-second tasks that hasn't been automated. And one of the reasons is that AI is still inaccessible, okay, to those tasks. One of the things that's going to be tremendously helpful for mankind, okay, is to basically provide people with access to AI, or what we like to call AI democratization, right? A technology that allows people to build their own AI for their 5-second tasks. Okay, think of the productivity. Okay, that's going to improve if we really do that. Even here, right? Who are knowledge workers sitting in this room can go back to their desk and identify 5-second tasks and identify tools that can help them automate. Okay, so I'm very optimistic, okay, that at some point AI is going to be so democratized that anyone can automate their own 5-second tasks.
Okay, I think that this point of the monetization is a good point to conclude this panel. I think really this is what's happening. It's being accessible. A lot of optimism, but we are always afraid of the unknown, so we have to combat it in the best way. So I want to thank you all, unless you have another thing to say. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you for the audience for joining us, and we will let ChatGPT decide what will be the next episode of this series.